We'll try that again. Good evening and welcome to the August 9th, 2021 meeting of the Planning Board of the Town of Chatham. My name is Catherine Halpern. I'm Chair of the Planning Board of the Town of Chatham. This meeting is being conducted for remote participation by the public. The Planning Board is present here in our main meeting room, but we do provide for remote participation by the public. And I'll be reading a few notes about that. Please note also that this meeting is being broadcast live on Channel 18 and will also be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing. This meeting of the Chatham Planning Board is being conducted in person and via remote for public participation in accordance with Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. And shall afford adequate alternative means by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410, and that's 1-508-945-4410. The conference ID number is 519-041-057 #. That's 519-041-057 #. So you may join the meeting by telephone, or you may also join the meeting online using Microsoft Teams through the link in the agenda that's posted on the town website on the Planning Board page. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. As I just mentioned, you can listen to this meeting while it's in progress by telephone, by calling 508-945-4410, conference ID number 519-041-057 #. You may also join the meeting online using Microsoft Teams through the link in the agenda posted on the website. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, and as I mentioned earlier, we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. In accordance with town policy, the public can speak to any issue or business item on the agenda during the meeting when recognized by the chair, and I will let you know as we go through the agenda. Generally, we invite public comment after the Planning Board has discussed the matter. So let's go through a few points about remote participation. In the event that anyone becomes muted on your telephone, please press *6. We'll begin the meeting with a roll call of all board members. When I call on non-board members to speak, please repeat your last name before you speak, and if you're connected by phone, please repeat the last 4 digits of your phone number for identification purposes. As I mentioned, after an agenda item has been discussed by the public body, in this case the Planning Board, I will request for citizens or non-board members to make their comments or ask questions. For all Planning Board votes tonight, all votes will be taken by roll call, and we will end the meeting with a verbal confirmation of adjournment, and we'll note the time of adjournment. Before we go on, I just need to ask if anyone is recording the meeting. It is all right to record the meeting, but you do need to notify us. I'll give you a few seconds in case you're muted. And also I need to ask if any board members need to recuse themselves from any matters that are on tonight's agenda. Okay, there being none, let's begin with our roll call of all board members. Art Sprue, are you present?
Art Sprue, present.
Warren Chain?
Warren Chain, present.
Tom Gagan?
Tom Gagan, present.
Roger Griffin?
Roger Griffin, present.
Bob Dubus?
Bob Dubus, present.
Bob Wirtschafter? Bob Wirtschafter,
Bob
you might...
Wirtschafter is present.
Great, Bob is connected
Bob
remotely.
Wirtschafter is present.
Thank you, Bob.
Yes.
And this is Catherine Halpern. I'm also present. So let's go on to our first agenda item, which is the long-range planning discussion. We hope to continue this discussion not longer than 5:30 p.m.
Did you want to do the minutes first?
No, the minutes are after. Yeah, we'll just start with the airport. So this is a discussion with Airport Commission members. I believe we have Huntley Harrison connected, and Mike, is it Mike Galen who's connected? Regarding.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
So this is a continuation of our discussion with Airport Commission members regarding Chatham Municipal Airport considerations in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. As many of you know, the Planning Board is continuing an effort to create rezoning for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. This has been a long-term, long-range planning effort that's based in the consideration of the implementation of our comprehensive plan for the town of Chatham. The Chatham Airport has what's called a runway protection zone that does intersect with some of the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. So we want to continue our discussion with the Airport Commission and their consultant, Matt Karen. We also have Town Council present on the call to consider the next steps. I'm going to introduce our town planner, Ali Sabatino, who'll give us a brief recap of where we stand with these considerations. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'll just go through with the planning board kind of where we are that got us to this point, kind of a summary of the steps that we've undertaken so far. So obviously, as Catherine was saying, we are currently in the process of rezoning the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. It's a process that the planning board has been doing for, I would say, a few years currently, just focusing on the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. But again, this has been in the works for a very long time. On February 26, 2021, through these discussions with the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, the Airport Commission sent a coordination letter to us to discuss specific airport considerations, including the RPZ in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. On March 17th, 2021, the Planning Board responded back with an invitation to have the coordination meeting to discuss these considerations. So on April 12th, 2021, the Planning Board and the members of the airport, some members of the Airport Commission had this coordination meeting. At this meeting, Town Council was present, the Airport Commission liaison was present, and also the Airport Commission consultant was present as well. So based upon these discussions, we wanted to bring this topic back to the Planning Board to discuss further, to see if we could incorporate it, or we should incorporate it into the West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning, just doing our due diligence as we normally do with zoning bylaws. So in your packet, there's the staff report with this discussion. It includes options to go forward. And like I said, Town Council is here. The liaison for the Airport Commission is here. Airport Commission members are attending virtually, as you can see on your screen. And we also have the Airport Commission consultant as well on the screen. And so the recommendation in your packet, if the board does choose to consider this, and the board can obviously have more discussion with these parties that are here tonight. So if the board would like to go forward with that, we can obviously have more discussion with the parties that are here tonight, but if the board does decide to go forward with the staff recommendation, I just wanted to confirm that that is the first step. There'll be much more discussion going forward if there is a policy directive that comes back to the planning board and or potential zoning measure. So I just wanted to put that out there, but again, it's a staff recommendation and the board, based upon discussions, can discuss and make any recommendation that they see fit. So with that, I think, and with the permission of the chair, I think I'd like to hand it over to Town Council to discuss more fully the recommendation from staff.
Thanks, Ali. Please go ahead, Pat.
Good evening. Can you hear me, folks?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Good evening, everyone. we've had several discussions relative to this matter in terms of how to best proceed with regard to developing and considering a runway protection zone zoning bylaw. I'm fully aware and know that the planning board has put a great deal of time and effort into the West Chatham rezoning initiative. And in my view, as we previously discussed, I think perhaps the most effective way to address the runway protection zone would be by consideration of an overlay district to apply to the underlying zoning that the planning board ultimately decides to adopt with respect to the West Chatham district. The underlying zoning that the board is presently considering obviously takes into account the overall conditions and circumstances relative to this particular area of town. And the board will adopt a zoning scheme that it deems to be most effective and most constructive in terms of the types of uses and development that the board wishes to see in this particular area. Given the fact that the runway protection zone areas are certainly located within the West Chatham district, but are limited and relatively easily defined, I think that an overlay that the airport commission could work to put together with its consultants and with myself would be the most effective way to zone or control the nature and type of uses that are conducted within the RPZ areas. To that end, I would suggest that the planning board could suggest or request that the airport commission consider what it deems to be appropriate land use restrictions for the RPZ. We would certainly work to fashion those restrictions in a compliance with present federal law, or other similar restrictions that other municipalities have adopted for their runway protection zones. And the airport commission could then present a proposed overlay district to the planning board for its consideration, review, recommendation, comments, and then would proceed obviously with the zoning bylaw adoption process through planning board hearings and town meeting authorization. I believe that when we look at the samples of other RPZ restrictions that are in place in other communities, as we have done, they vary somewhat depending on the specific airport needs and uses in any given community. And I think that given the Airport Commission's expertise relative to the aviation aspects of the operations at the Chatham Municipal Airport, it would be in my view, an ideal position to at least provide the first suggestion or level of restriction for the airport that, again, the planning board could then review and approve, make recommendations on. The underlying zoning in the West Chatham district, as noted a minute ago, is something that involves a comprehensive and detailed scheme that the board will ultimately determine best suits the needs for that area. There's no reason why the RPZ couldn't be imposed or overlaid over that particular zoning scheme that the board determines, and has the limited effect of applying strictly to those particular portions of the district that are within the runway protection zone and do warrant additional or heightened regulation. So that is just my thought on it. I do think that an overlay would be the most effective way to do it. It's a discrete set of zoning rules that would apply to a particular area. And it is something that, as the needs of the airport may evolve or change over time, it could be amended or revised in and of itself without a need to pry back into the underlying West Chatham zoning bylaw. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Pat. I do have some correspondence regarding this matter. I think what I'd like to do is go through the board and see if we have questions or comments for Pat, for our town council. Then we'll read the correspondence that we have, and then after that, take public comment. So, Art, do you have questions or comments for our town council? Or Ally? Yeah.
Just town council, no one else?
No, any questions? Go
Okay.
ahead.
All right. Well, since our last meeting, I've done a re-review of some of the information that I didn't have a chance to do from the first time. I took a look at the 2019 Airport Master Plan. I read through it. I read the environmental assessment, and there's a couple of things that jump out at me, and I just want to vet them a little bit for the board to think about and consider, and also the airport and the Airport Commission. One of the things I note in the master plan is in Chapter 8, where they're talking about the FAA grant assurances. There's a section there for assurance number 6. It says consistency with local plans. And it asks for all projects with the airport must be consistent with the city, county comprehensive plans, transportation plans, zoning ordinances, hazard mitigation plans. The airport's sponsor and planners should all familiarize themselves with local planning documents before projects is considered and ensure that all projects follow local plans and ordinances. Now, I'm not sure that that was taken into consideration when the master plan was done. We certainly did our overall comprehensive plan in town. That was unanimously voted on in 2003. 2003. So it's that's been on the docket for, I think, 16 years before the update of the airport plan. So there was, in that, we talked about neighborhood centers, in particular the one in West Chatham. That is the one that's been most near and dear to us. There was a focus on it to upgrade all the roads there, put in a bike path there, sidewalks on both sides. It's in the first stages of making this a neighborhood center. And I was just sort of surprised that there isn't as much attention by the airport to also take that into consideration. If there's no plans for expansion or anything like that, then why push for something more than is needed? I'm not asking for the airport to go away. I'm just saying that work with us rather than just throwing things out there to make it more difficult for us to actually work as a community. And I'm sort of surprised. I've only been on the board 3 years now. I don't recall the Airport Commission, other than this recent letter, where they've reached out to us before their master plan to have any kind of discussions. Usually before you do a master plan, just like we do, we reach out to a lot of different entities. I thought that that would be helpful that if they did that. I think some of the things that Ally and Town Council have suggested do make sense to do right now, considering where we are. I asked back at the April meeting, there was in the memorandum from the FAA, September 27, 2012, there's supposedly these new guideline documents to outline a comprehensive review process for existing proposed land uses. I asked if that document was available and if that could be provided to us. And there's another similar one like that in the Airport Division runway protection zones, where they're talking about providing some guidance associated with existing I guess, property uses and businesses that are there. They're not going away, so we have to work in harmony on this and just looking at this from a one entity's perspective doesn't deal with some of those existing realities. So those are a couple of things that I think that needs to be worked out with the Airport Commission on this. I think it's a good idea. We don't know what these guidance are and these documents are that they're referring to. I don't think as a planning board member, I want to get into what the FAA does and doesn't do. But certainly I would like to understand what is it that the airport would like to propose for us. And I think they have to take a look at this from a minimalist change rather than a maximum change. If there's no benefit in doing any kind of adjustments or expansions, then let's not. Let's do a minimalist change. Most of the businesses and properties in the RPZ are not going to go away. They exist. So I think we have to figure out a way that this doesn't get any more of a challenging issue. One other point I noted when I looked at the environmental assessment, and I think it's something that the commission and their consultants need to go back and look. In the environmental assessment, they were sort of silent on the stormwater management of the whole airport. I'm not aware of what they have done to upgrade all of their facilities to deal with this. We have some issues and challenges associated with impacts to our wells. I believe 2 or 3 wells are in the area that are seeing some stress, and I think it's important with the Airport Commission, with their environmental assessment, to go back and evaluate what they can do to mitigate whatever stormwater management that they have or don't have on the airport property so that it doesn't impact our wells. This is something that should have been looked into. It's part of the stormwater management handbook for any project that happens here in Massachusetts. They need to look at all sorts of measures to mitigate any of those impacts to our watercourses, and that in particular our public drinking water supply. So those are some of the things that I looked at between last time and this time. I'm not necessarily looking for an answer to all of these now, but I think it's something that needs to be put into the discussions when we move forward with the next piece, which I think some of the suggestions we've heard from staff seems like a first step that we should think about. That's all I have for now, Catherine.
Thanks, Art. Yes, Ally, go ahead.
I do believe that the Airport Commission is raising their hand, so I'm not
All
sure
right.
if they would like to respond if that's.
Yes. And so is it Huntley or is it, all right.
It's Huntley.
Huntley, if you'd like to respond, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick clarification. First of all, on the first part of Mr. Spruce statement regarding maximum and minimum and so on, we're not going to propose wholesale clearing of the RPZ. We hope that it stays exactly as it is. What we are hoping going forward is that whatever might happen in there follows the guidelines that the FAA has set forth for RPZs. We know that what's in there now, we really can't change, but future development, we would like to make sure that the zoning board with the overlay district has some control based on the FAA guidelines, and that we don't have any issues with someone coming in and wanting to build a 3-story building, perhaps where Job Lot is if they go out of business or something like that, and keep the population of that area as minimal as possible. With regard to your second statement about the water, I would refer you to the environmental assessment and read that through again, if you already have. We do have, just so you know, we have in referenced in both the master plan and the environmental assessment our stormwater pollution prevention plan and how we deal with stormwater. We also have a spill prevention, control, and countermeasures plan that takes care of issues of that sort. So I think, well, I hope that that allays your fears with regard to water issues at the airport, and that you know and have confidence that we have addressed these, not only with these two documents, the master plan and the environmental assessment, but also over the last few years with regard to infrastructure and the plugging of drains and so on, which was mandated back in the early 2000s. So we're doing all we can at the airport to make sure that we take care of our environment. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Huntley. Is there someone else who has their hand raised? I'd just like to make a comment, Arthur, about this point. I think it's an important one, about the consistency with local plans and with the comprehensive plan. Ali and I were just discussing briefly the history of this, and I don't think we've done enough research to know for sure, but as far as we know, the RPZ has basically been the same since the airport was first built back in, what was it, 1959. The comprehensive plan came later, but I think even, it's not, anyway, I'm just saying it's not completely clear which came first. Ali, do you want to make a comment on that?
Terry might be able to answer that question better. I know he's done a lot of research into the history.
Terry, can you answer that question?
Yes, good evening. Terry Whalen, staff liaison to the Airport Commission. Yeah, so regarding the progression in land use, so the Chatham Municipal Airport was formed or came to be as a municipal airport in 1949. So the runway and airport use predates actually all the zoning in Chatham. So that's one factor, and there were some changes to the runway over that time frame. But from a land use perspective, the airport predates all zoning, as a use. So I don't know if that gives some context. And then and through any compliance.
Thank you, Terry. This is Catherine again. Thank you, Terry. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that it does seem the airport predates zoning, also predates the comprehensive plan. Nevertheless, it is true what you say, that the existence of the runway protection zone over the West Chatham Neighborhood Center is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan of the town of Chatham. Yes, yes, Tom.
Sorry. For my benefit, I think it would be more helpful if the board members were allowed to speak and not go back and forth. I think that becomes somewhat confusing, and it gets into more of a debate situation. So if you would allow the rest of the members of the planning board to speak, and then if people wish to speak for or against that, it might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So let's go on to Warren.
Yes, this is Warren Chain. I have some general comments, but also then some questions for most probably town council, but perhaps the airport commission, that will help inform my my views going forward. The general comment that I have is that the proposal that is being made by staff suggests to me that many alternatives to an overlay district have been thought about and rejected. I don't know what those alternatives are, nor do I know why they were rejected necessarily, notwithstanding the comments from town council. It also is the case that I feel woefully unprepared to personally assess whether an overlay district is the best way to go. As some of my questions may in fact suggest, for which I certainly don't have answers yet, it would seem to me that the nature of an overlay district is something which this board is really not in a position to deal with at the moment. If someone, i.e. the Airport Commission, Town Council, and staff works, let's call it the town administration, believes that an overlay district is a solution to a problem, then I suggest that it would be more appropriate for them to come forward to the planning board with a proposal that will solve the problem, with assessments as for why the problem exists, what alternatives were looked at, what costs are involved, what timeframes are involved, compliance with other regulations in the town, and so on, such that by virtue of presenting such a recommendation, the board can be informed and have an opinion. It does seem to me that the issue of the moment for the planning board really is how to move our draft proposal for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center forward. And for that purpose, we don't need to involve the RPZ at all, especially if the ultimate answer is an overlay district, because we're saying, you know, we should move forward without any consideration for the RPZ. And it may be appropriate even at this meeting to, make a motion to that effect. But I get ahead of myself here. Pardon me. Thought I turned it off. So at any rate, that's where I'm coming from. It seems to me highly likely that it may come out as an overlay district, but I don't know. It would seem to me one option would be to do absolutely nothing. We seem to have done absolutely nothing so far without any consequences of which I'm aware, without any risks of which I'm aware, without any costs of which I'm aware. And maybe that's still an option. I don't know. But with that as preamble, I guess, I would see if I could get some input that would be helpful to me. And it's likely I'll address it to either town council or to the airport commission. I'm not sure where the expertise would lie. A couple of things that are in Chapter 11 are, gave me interest to follow up on. In Section 5, the Airport Commission is the administrative agency to administer Chapter 11. And it talks about, just the general question, have there been any administrative actions under Chapter 11, ever? One.
You mean
One
chapter
of which you're
100?
aware?
Chapter 100, you mean implementation of chapter, or
Chapter 11.
enforcement of chapter 100? Is that your question?
Yes.
Has it
that is
been
the-
enforced?
Well,
Yeah.
just as background.
Yeah,
The Airport Commission is charged with administering that. Since it was enacted, it's a matter of, I think, some interest as to whether there's been any enforcement action. Yes, Chapter 100. What was I saying? Oh, well,
Chapter
there you
11.
go.
Yeah,
No, Chapter
enough.
100. It also provides for variances, a process. Now, I granted that it's talking about approach zones, all right, three-dimensional space and height above ground, et cetera, et cetera. not RPZs, but there is a process there. So I would have the question, gee, is that process relevant for an RPZ? I don't know. Is the Airport Commission the relevant administrative agency to deal with variances? And enforcement. It talks about police enforcement, as a matter of fact, for Chapter 100. Questions like that seem to me to be rather important for the question of developing a zoning overlay. Especially if I still have the question as to whether doing nothing, which is what the town has done so far, is no longer an option. I'm flummoxed, as good a word as any, by what Art brought up, and that is the FAA guidance, which seems to be driving what might be required here. Is from 2012, and it's interim guidance to be finalized in 2013. Well, I don't think, as far as I know, it's not been finalized since 2013. And there's also, I think, the document which Art brought up as well, which was land use compatibility advisory guidance, which would be highly relevant for what uses might be appropriate. That was noted as being published or scheduled for being published in 2014. Well, I don't think anything's happened since. But does it make any sense to even think about drafting an ordinance based on only interim guidance of documents that were supposed to be finalized 8-9 years ago? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it does, but I'm not in a position to say one way or the other, nor do I think this board ought to be in a position to have an opinion at this point. Let's see, what else have I got here? This is a little bit on the down in the weeds, but I think relevant because things have costs sometimes. The Airport Improvement Program appears to provide grant availability for land acquisition within an RPZ, which raises the whole question of, oh, well, if we could use other people's money to acquire properties in an RPZ, that might make sense to understand that that would be an option. But if it were, the question would be, well, okay, the town would own such properties, and then you would probably need a town meeting, maybe not, to change the use from whatever it was to municipal or to airport or to RP. I mean, I don't know the answer to these questions. I just see them coming, but it does seem to me that if there are financial consequences involved, it's something that certainly I would want to know on the board before I said that's the way we want to go for an overlay district. I don't know, but it's a question, I guess. Has the Airport Improvement Program ever been considered for use with respect to the RPZ issues? I don't think so, but I don't know the answer. And I think I've already said this, but if it were available and or desirable, what would be the process by which a grant could be utilized to acquire property to be then transferred into municipal ownership for a change of use, and what would that use be? Just questions. Rick Levitt had sent and was distributed to us an email dated, I think, the 15th of April. And it was read, I believe, into the record at some point, so I guess I can make reference to it. He's talking in it about grant assurances that have been given by the town based on past grants. Well, the whole question of what kind of legal obligations, moral obligations, Impacts on bond ratings, for example, perhaps come to mind if we were to walk away from those assurances, which were accepted by the town. But in that email, he talks about most of the FAA, the most that the FAA will do is refuse future grant requests. That's a big question to me. Is that true? Is that all they're going to do? Or does it affect our bond rating? Does it affect the next time we really want to do something at the airport? Unanimous approval at a town meeting, and you can't get a grant because you've walked away from everything. I mean, is that, those kind of questions seem to me are important as to whether or not you, or how you wish to proceed. That question already got answered.
Warren, may I just interject? I think some of the questions you've brought up, we could request, they do have answers. And I think Town Council and Matt Karen are both in a position to answer certain of your questions, and we could go through and have some reply.
We could
to
do
some of
that,
those
and I don't wish
questions.
to, I asked
that's
the
the purpose
questions
of this-
only by
yeah.
background as to why I made the comment that I began with.
Right.
That I don't feel this board should be asked to rule out any other options than an overlay district when we've not been presented those options.
We can also look at that question as well, so.
And nor do I feel that it's important that we have a decision with respect to the appropriate way forward with an RPZ. What this board needs to get forward with is the zoning for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, which I think even if you were to go with an overlay, you're basically confirming we don't want to change the underlying zoning. So it would seem to me sufficient for this board to conclude, vote, agree that the West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning would make no reference to an RPZ. End of story. Until we have a lot more information about what's the proper way to go forward. So mostly comments, but those questions, some of which have answers, maybe all do.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily want to take up this
No,
board's time this evening to get specific answers to those because I don't think this board should be worrying about the RPZ. And, those that know about it can decide what they might wish to propose and come forward to the board with an explanation as to why and what other options are there. If there were one question, I would say, do we have the option to do nothing, just as we've done so far?
Yes, I think we should address that question, and we should address your questions about land acquisition. We should address your question about other options, and we should address your question about the update to the FAA guidelines that were published in 2012, the interim guidelines. So I think, if I might, and we should address your question about doing nothing. So let's come back to that, but I think I'd like to ask Town Council if he could comment on other options and also on the issue of land acquisition.
Point of order, Madam Chair, I think we agreed that the board would be able to speak.
I think it's useful, though, we are having, this is comments, questions, so it is useful to address the points as they come up, I think.
I think we agreed that the members of the board would be able to speak and we don't get into debate and that each of us.
It's not a
do.
debate, it's answering questions, and that is our general procedure. And I think it's good as each board member speaks that we address any questions or issues that come up. And it's not a debate, we're just trying to answer Warren's
But
questions.
that's not what we just agreed to. When I made my first point of order was, can we all speak and then have people who would like
All
to
right, we'll come
respond to
back,
that?
all right, if
If you'd like to put that to a vote, I'd be happy to make a motion.
It's all right. We will come back to Warren's questions after all board members have spoken. So go ahead, Mr. Gagan.
Third time's the charm. Thank you. I agree with Warren and certainly Arthur's concerns. My concerns are that the board, the planning board, should not be doing the work of the airport commissioners, and we shouldn't be involved in an RPZ at this time. We have an underlying challenge to continue with what we are trying to write a plan for and present at town meeting for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. I'm quite concerned that we're going to get into situations with an RPZ that are not solvable at this moment in time. Why would we, the board, allow another entity to tell us what to do relative to an RPZ? I think we should go forward. We should discuss what we wish to see in terms of the zoning for this area. And let the Airport Commission and other entities present stuff, their concerns to the board, and we can respond to that. But it is not the position for this board to do that work. And I just think we're on a slippery slope. The things that I'd like to discuss in terms of not doing this is we're not talking about the future of the RPZ zone, and it's been alluded to that as that area gets developed with the minor areas or land areas, that you're going to be reducing values, you're going to be reducing real estate values for the future, and there are overlay costs for the citizens of this town. I remind myself several times today in a meeting, and now again, that when I was reinstated as a member of this board for the second time, that the oath I took was to uphold what was in the best interest of the citizens of Chatham, West Chatham and the rest of the community, and I don't think those questions have been answered. So I'm not in favor of allowing a ZBA, overlay district to be suggested by anyone, including town council. I think it's premature, and I think, as Warren and I think Arthur have alluded to, we don't have the information to do that at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Roger?
I guess I feel that I'm sort of staying as it is profile. I think when we started with art, we seem to be, the West Chatham Center at this point is in a positive direction, and we're pretty much there. And every time we talk about the airport, and even starting with art, we always end up at the same place. We have more questions than answers. We really do.
We can get to some answers.
I know, but I don't think we're not going to get those answers tonight.
We'll have some of them. Yeah, we will.
Yeah, but not enough to really make a decision that was probably in, the airport, that there was hopeful for tonight. I don't see, we'll never answer all these answers tonight. We all have way too many questions. And this is not the capacity of square footage on a particular lot. This is an important step. And I at this point, I don't know why I would have a question for town council. Why can't we keep on hearing the changes they want to make, we're still going to be as it is. Let me ask the legal counsel, why can't we leave it the way it is? Why do we need to make this, why do we need to include the RPZ zone in West Chatham at all? I mean, specifically, start with a question that we can either get an answer or not get an answer. And I think that's where I feel we need to start asking. If we can ask the questions, we can start getting answers.
Okay.
Because we've been here before, in many different ways, we've been here, more or less asking the same questions. And now it's back, but it's actually back to the point where we're asking to make a motion or something we're not prepared because we're not educated enough. And I think sometimes maybe we're not informed enough. And it just comes back to the same thing. Everybody has more questions than answers. I think I would, and I'm nothing against the airport at all, I just think that we just seem to continually get to a stone wall. And here we are again. But
Okay.
why can't we just leave it the way it is?
So why don't we'll go on to Mr. Dubus, and then I've made a list of people's questions, and we'll try to address some of the questions. If you're done, Roger. Okay.
Well, Mr. Dubus is leaning along the lines of Warren and Tom. Just So there's not much more I can say. I'm not that well educated in that type of stuff.
Okay, great, thank you. And Bob Wirtschafter, yes, you're connected remotely.
Yes, yes, thank you. I have a set of questions, I guess, for Terry Whalen and our legal counsel. But Terry implied that because the airport was there first, it had some kind of precedent. But I think the issue was sort of at the time the airport was there, what was the RPZ, if there even was one, and then at the later dates, as things got built, as the job lot got built and others, what's the timing, and when did the RPZ extend into the job lot, and now when did it become a situation where it's extending well beyond the job lot into most of West Chatham? So I would like to have a clearer indication of precedent and legal rights in those sense, in terms of how those decisions are made. And quite frankly, until the decisions are made about where the RPZ is and its effect on West Chatham, I almost don't want to continue doing the West Chatham planning, because I don't want to waste the next 6 months putting together a plan for a village center that's going to be made moot by a decision that's made about the RPZ. Will totally negate any value for what we do. So I'm very much in agreement with what Art and everyone else has said, but it leads me to wonder whether we should continue doing the planning for the West Chatham until this gets resolved.
So Bob, I hear a couple
That's all I
hear a couple of questions. Your last question is about whether or not to continue with the West Chatham Neighborhood Center planning until the issues of the RPZ are resolved. But you also had specific questions that could be addressed to Terry or possibly to Matt about the timing. Was the RPZ the same as it is today when the airport was first established in 1949? Did the RPZ predate the construction of the various properties and so on? I'm not sure how much detailed information we have on that, but Terry, maybe Matt, could you answer the questions about the RPZ and its extent and location, if we have information about that?
Sure. So I can say that I don't have detailed information on the exact parameters of the RPZ when it was established, but RPZs first came out around the 1950s. So I suspect it probably predates the job lot building, and the size of it probably hasn't changed very much. But again, the exact details of what that looks like when it first was implemented versus today, I'd have to get back to you on that information.
Okay, thank you. And Terry Whalen, do you have any further information about, the dates of the development of that area vis-a-vis the existence of the RPZ, to answer Bob Wirtschafter's questions?
Yes, and I'd like a clarification on that, Catherine. The RPZ existed, but did it expand as the airport expanded, and when did that take place? If the RPZ expanded at any point because of expansion of the runways?
Terry, I don't know if you can answer that question, or is that a question for Matt again?
I can't answer that question, and as Matt indicated, I don't think we've looked at it, the general timeline that he's talking about where RPZs kind of came into being. So again, the only kind of analysis that we've done was again as part of a land use inspection report, and we did lay out the progression of the changes of zoning. As I mentioned in my earlier comments or first comments, prior to zoning being adopted in Chatham, the airport was already there, and then there were multiple changes to the town zoning. We haven't done the analysis of the changes in the how those changes also relate to the RPZ. But just to be clear, and Matt, maybe Matt would be more appropriate to comment that the RPZ has not changed and is not proposed to be changed with the airport master plan update.
Right. And Terry, do you, forgive me for asking again, but historically you don't have exact information about whether, since the airport was first established in 1949 and RPZs in the 50s, has it changed since then, or has it remained relatively the same? Maybe Matt can answer that question.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I could say on that, Catherine, is that it's probably remained relatively the same. If you take a look at Chapter 100, there's a plan that's associated with that has the airport's approach surface within that. And so the runway protection zone would certainly have been contained within the approach surface, so it probably hasn't changed significantly. But that's something we'd have to go back and work with FAA on to see if we can get some historical reference for the dimensions of that RPZ.
Great. Thank you. And Ally, did you want to go ahead, or is someone raising their hand?
I believe that town council is raising his hand.
Great. Let's have some words from Pat. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to elaborate a bit on the history of the RPZs, as noted, the Chatham Airport commenced operations in 1949. It wasn't until 1952 that the federal government, pursuant to a report by the President's Airport Commission, established a concept of what was called clear zones around airports. The clear areas that were identified in the federal reports were designed not only to preclude obstructions potentially hazardous to aircraft, but also to control building construction and protect from nuisances and hazards to people on the ground. So the federal government's purview, if you will, are its motivations in requiring airport operators to adopt these clear zone regulations expanded somewhat from on-premise airport protections, preventing airport hazards, to protecting some of the surrounding areas of the airport where overrunning runways, things of that nature could occur. So the clear zone concept, regulatory requirements have been in effect since, as has been previously noted, 1952 or the mid-50s. Thereafter, the FAA introduced the concept of runway protection zones, or RPZs, as a replacement term for clear zone. And RPZs were divided into two areas, quote, extended object free and, quote, controlled activity areas. The extended object free area was subsequently renamed the central portion of the RPZ. The function of the RPZ is to enhance the protection of people and property on the ground, as I noted. Where practical, airport owners are encouraged to acquire ownership to those properties adjacent to the airports as the primary way of assuring such safety. If that is not feasible and it's not required, local airport operators are encouraged to acquire easements to restrict the level of construction and activities that are conducted within these areas. And the third, least intrusive means of affording that protection would be by adopting appropriate land use regulations, such as RPZ zoning requirements, which is what we're talking about now. The FAA has not really illuminated its position regarding RPZs since, to my knowledge, since that September 27, 2012 advisory or memorandum that it issued as interim guidance. As a prior speaker, board member noted that there was an intent stated at that time to come out with more definitive regulations to clarify its position. And to my knowledge, that there is no such thing. We're still operating on the 2012, 2013 guidance materials issued by the FAA. And what I've heard from the board members thus far, I don't think is entirely inconsistent or contrary to what I had suggested at the outset. I know you want to proceed to work on the finalization of the West Chatham zoning. You're well on the way to doing that. I think it would be entirely appropriate for the Airport Commission to come back to the board with a proposed bylaw or a proposed overlay, whichever is most appropriate, along with the rationale and the explanations for what it's proposing. And then the planning board can review it in conjunction with its current work on the West Chatham zoning. And it'll be a process. It'll be a give and take, back and forth process from there. But I wholly concur with the members' sentiments that the Airport Commission, its consultants, should come up with the substantive terms and conditions of the proposed bylaw or regulation, and should be able to explain the necessity or the need therefore to the satisfaction of the planning board. So that, I think we're all on the same page in that regard, that that's how it should operate. But as I said a minute ago, the adoption of these land use regulations is certainly something that the FAA encourages. As was noted, it does require, pursuant to the grant assurances, that airport operators sign on to when they obtain federal funding, that such protections are put in place and that the use and operations of airports are consistent with master plans and other such documents that guide the use of town land. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to bring the Chatham scheme of land use regulation via your zoning bylaws up to speed to at least be in compliance with the regulation and the guidance that the FAA has issued for airport operators. Right now, we have Chapter 100. Chapter 100 is principally intended to eliminate airport hazards and to protect the interests of the users of the airport, the pilots and the craft that are flying into and out of the airport, to keep the airport and the surrounding areas free of hazards that could impede flight. The RPZ, as I noted a minute ago, affords a different sort of protection. It's intended, per FAA recommendation and guidance, to protect properties and persons on those portions of the property adjoining or abutting the airport. So there's a little bit of a different focus there. And since the primary essence of these regulations would be to regulate the use and development of land, they would most appropriately fall within the context of zoning ordinances or bylaws under Chapter 40A. And that's why this particular endeavor is being proposed now, because no one can dispute the fact that the RPZ is proximate to, it lies within portions of the West Chatham zoning district. So it just seemed to be an opportune time to bring our regulations somewhat more up to speed. Now, to answer a question that was asked, what if we don't do anything? I can't tell you as I sit here right now that Chatham has what the FAA would consider to be comprehensive and adequate regulations relative to land use in the RPZ in place. I don't think we do right now. To date, to my knowledge, the FAA has never asserted any type of threat or intent to pursue any action against the town in that regard. But when you read the regulations, you read the guidance, you read the grant assurance documents, I think it's pretty clear that there is an expectation, if not a contractual obligation on the town's part to implement such regulations. And again, because of the initiative underway with West Chatham, we figured this would be an opportune time to explore that.
Thank you, Pat. This is Catherine. I'd just like to comment. I really appreciate your explanation of some of those points, because the question also came up. Well, a couple of questions. One is this the work of the planning board? And I think to sum up what you've said, Chapter 100 addresses different issues than are addressed by rezoning the area. That the town is, in some sense, has an obligation to provide proper zoning for the safety and protection of its citizens within the runway protection zone. I think we've established that for whatever reason, this hasn't been done to date. The airport predated Chatham zoning, protective zoning bylaw, and the airport also predated our comprehensive plan. The existence of the runway protection zone, to the best that we can understand, has been roughly in the same place since the 1950s that it's in now. So it essentially predated Chatham zoning, and it also predated the comprehensive plan. But proper zone, for some reason, whatever it was historically, proper zoning for the RPZ was not structured into Chatham Protective Zoning Bylaw. So what we're looking at is a situation right now, whatever we think in the grand scheme of things is right or wrong, right now the reality is we have an airport. The airport has a runway protection zone. That runway protection zone overlays the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, where even if we weren't working on new zoning there, it's currently zoned GB3. And GB3 zoning is inconsistent with the recommendations for a runway protection zone. It is the question was asked, is this planning board work? The planning board is a regulatory body. We work for the town of Chatham. It is our obligation to work within the structure of Mass General Law, of Chatham General Bylaw, and also the Chatham Protective Zoning Bylaw. So we work within that structure. We have certain mandates. We have certain parameters within which we work. We are a regulatory board, but we also are the legislative body for the town of Chatham, which means that it's this board that proposes amendments to protective zoning bylaw where it's required and where it's desired for the public good, for the citizens of the town of Chatham. What we have here is a situation where, for whatever reason, that runway protection zone does exist, and it has existed for quite a long time, but the proper zoning has never been given to it. It is our responsibility as the legislative body of the town of Chatham to see that proper zoning is implemented there, unless the situation can be mitigated or addressed through other means. And I think that was the question that Warren was bringing up. Are there other options? And if I could ask town council to comment on those other options, particularly easements or the exercise of eminent domain and purchase land acquisition.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As previously noted, yeah, there are basically three options that the FAA has outlined whereby an airport sponsor can obtain a sufficient interest in the runway protection zones. The first is to acquire by purchase, taking, what have you, the property that lies within the RPZ. Obviously, an acquisition of land by eminent domain or purchase is costly. In many instances, it would be an involuntary acquisition of a private property owner's property, which public authorities tend to shy away from as much as possible. The second choice option is to acquire easements, which could be either purchased or taken by eminent domain in the same manner that the fee interest would be acquired. You can institute a plan whereby a combination of outright land acquisitions and easements are utilized to acquire the requisite interest in these properties. I don't believe there's been any significant analysis, and I could be wrong, to date as to the potential costs of such real estate acquisitions, but they are the primary two methods by which the FAA would prefer to see airport sponsors securing the interest in the runway protection zone. Short of that, the third alternative is to rely upon adequate zoning, which should be enacted. They suggest even if fees or easement ownerships are in place, the land use regulatory scheme of the town obviously would apply prospectively to properties. It wouldn't impact pre-existing non-conforming structures or uses. They would maintain their legal status, so there wouldn't be any impact on them. But those are in essence the only three options available to secure the RPZ interest.
Thank you, Pat. I
Madam
wanted,
Chair?
I wanted to go on with one more question, Mr. Gagan. Could we do that? And then I'll be happy to allow you to speak. I just wanted to address the question that came up also regarding the incompatibility of the RPZ with the town's comprehensive plan and with the development of the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, that this is an area of town that the comprehensive plan calls for redevelopment, calls for making availability denser, more density with more options for housing and commercial uses. So I want to ask the question, maybe Matt is the appropriate person. Is there a possibility of making changes in the airport that would work, you could say in the other direction, that would work to relocate or shorten, change the RPZ from where it currently stands, where it overlays the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, but is there a possibility of making some change in the airport that would allow the RPC to be moved or be made smaller so that this incompatibility is not in existence?
Thank
I'll
you,
ask Matt.
Madam. Yep, thank you, Madam Chairman. So realistically, the only way to shift the runway protection zone would be is if there was a displaced threshold implemented at the airport, but unfortunately that creates a whole separate series of safety issues and additional violations to the grant assurances. So like I say, the only real way to get the RPZ out of the West Chatham area would be to displace the threshold on the runway 6 end. But then that shifts and it actually, encompasses additional parcels that are abutting the existing airport proper. And like I said, it introduces a whole series of other safety issues at the airport, including reduced runway landing availability for aircraft that utilize the airport. Probably that's the most significant one.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Mr. Gagan, you had a comment or a question?
No, I'd like to make a motion.
Please go ahead.
I would move that the planning board not entertain any overlay district to be supported by the planning board at this time and continue with our zoning work for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center.
Okay. I appreciate your motion. However, we're in the middle of discussion. We haven't yet read correspondence, and we also haven't asked for comments by the public. So I'm just wondering if we could revisit your motion after we go through the rest of the proceedings.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Warren, yes, please go ahead.
One other, I think, short question. We've talked really exclusively about the RPZ on the south end of the airport.
Right.
Well, there's two RPZs.
That's correct.
And is there an inconsistency to be pointing towards a solution on one end of the runway which doesn't equally apply to the other end of the runway?
I will answer that question, and I'm going to ask town council to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what would be considered if we were to do zoning for the RPZ is that it would be considered for both runways on both sides, because it would be, and that again is another beneficial feature of the overlay district, that it could apply to both runways. And also that if rather than integrating, for example, rather than integrating it into the West Chatham neighborhood zoning itself, the overlay district also gives the advantage that if there is any change in the exact location of the RPZ, the overlay district can apply to those exact dimensions always. So good, that's a good question. Were there any other questions or comments before I go on to reading the correspondence from board members, from anyone? Okay, so we have received some letters, and I just want to read those, and then we will also accept public comment before we go on to further discussion or motions from the board. So I do want to just go over a question that was submitted by Warren with an answer by Matt. The question was, let's see, regarding easements, and I'll read Matt's answer. All right. Simply speaking, the FAA requires that the Airport Commission keep its approach surfaces clear of obstructions. One way of doing this is through the acquisition of avigation easements, which gives the Airport Commission the rights to clear obstructing trees from properties, now and in the future as needed. However, the FAA will only participate in funding tree clearing projects if the Airport Commission has perpetual rights to do so, avigation easements. From a master plan exercise and more recently, the EA, we assume that avigation easements are the means for tree clearing, as it is the most rigorous process. The master plan and the EA at this time is simply setting the Airport Commission up on the FAA prescribed path to addressing the known safety issue. However, the Airport Commission does not necessarily, even after the completion of the master plan and/or EA, have to address the issues of trees via avigation easements. The Airport Commission, through the town bylaw, can absolutely work to address the issue of trees through Chapter 100 instead, or work with property owners, either at the expense of the town or individual property owners, to clear the trees without FAA's participation. The question raised by Warren is a great question and requires input from town council regarding the enforceability of Chapter 100. Assuming for the moment that Chapter 100 is enforceable, the Airport Commission may choose to go that direction and reduce the number of avigation easements currently estimated. So that was the answer to your question about the enforceability of Chapter 100, I believe. Do you have further questions on that matter that we should direct to town council?
Well, I don't think that answered the enforceability of it.
All right.
Which talks about even through police action.
Okay.
With the responsibility being to administer those actions being the Airport Commission. I still have that question. It also, as I say, that raised the issue of who pays for what, the town, the property owner, or the federal government. There's a big difference, I guess, between avigation easements, which can be funded through grants, through the AIP program, and if you don't have the easements, then it's either the town or the property owner who's going to pay for it. That's a reasonably important feature, seems to me, and certainly a reason not to consider walking away from prior agreements that have been undertaken by the town if it would mean you would never be able to get further grants, which might be needed ongoing in order to administer the trimming or removal of trees, for example. But again, it's it's just one more of the issues or the questions that I have that I would want to know about
Yeah.
before seriously administering or looking at a proposed overlay. As I say, there's nothing that will preclude any subset of town management, administration, or the public, for that matter, for proposing a draft zoning overlay, and would encourage them to do so. But it doesn't seem that this board ought to be in the position of deciding what direction to go, whether it's an overlay, whether it's do nothing, whether it's wait for the guidance to be finalized, if it ever is. I don't know. But we shouldn't, I think, endorse one single direction, because we don't know, I don't know enough as a board member to do so. But I would encourage whomever does to create a draft agreement that they can propose to us, justify, defend, and allow us to work with it in that way. But as I say, I don't think there's anything this board should, at the moment, be strictly endorsing as a way forward with respect to RPZ zoning overlays.
So I just
Which
want
doesn't mean that it's not the right answer either.
Right.
I mean,
if I could just clarify a couple things. Chapter 100 deals with different issues than the zoning overlay. Chapter 100 deals with vertical obstructions. Zoning overlay deals with uses and would seek to limit the use for the protection of the citizens of the town of Chatham. As far as other options, I think zoning overlay is one option. Integrating it into the zoning, the rezoning that is done for West Chatham is another option. That is just part of the rezoning of West Chatham. A zoning overlay is just a zoning district that's overlaid on the underlying zoning that supplants it within certain boundaries that are defined, certain meets and bounds that are defined. So that's an overlay district. We've discussed some reasons why that might be preferable rather than just rezoning at the base level. The other options that I understand are land acquisition, which could be done by the exercise of eminent domain, or easements. I think town council also addressed those, but they may not. He did mention that it is recommended that even if the land is acquired by the airport, it's still recommended that it's rezoned. So, yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that. So let's go through the remaining correspondence unless there's, yes, and we are getting close to 5:30. So I'll go ahead and read the correspondence and then we can take public comment. Yeah. All right. So I've got a few letters from Rick Levitt that I'll read. The first is the one dated from April. I find it alarming, although not uncharacteristic, that the Airport Commission's rigid stance is that the town must adopt its comprehensive development plan for West Chatham Village to accommodate expanded airport use, rather than the airport adapt its master development plan to accommodate the town. Chatham's comprehensive plan existed long before the recent push by the Airport Commission and current airport manager to expand airport use to include commercial flights, skydiving, and foul weather operations. Traditionally, Chatham Airport has served only local recreational flyers in small private planes with common sense to fly in good weather, plus the occasional plane ride for summer visitors. Chatham's Planning Board has no obligation to accommodate expanded airport use. Unwise so-called grant assurances given to the FAA by former airport commissions and town administrations in return for funding of various airport improvements are not binding on the Planning Board. The most that FAA will do is refuse grants for future airport improvements, a sensible move, returning responsibility and authority over airport use to local officials. West Chatham Village has lived comfortably for generations with a lightly used airport, job lot, and many other structures in the path of small airplanes taking off and landing were built on former farmland at the end of the runway. The gas station shown at bottom left, and he encloses a photo, in this 1959 photo, predated job lots development. Further development of West Chatham Village need not be limited as long as further development of Chatham Airport remains limited. Oops. But at Monday's planning board meeting, and this was some months ago, the chair of Chatham's Airport Commission said that nothing should be built there, referring to the area at the end of the runway. A section of job lot's massive parking lot and land behind the gas station outside the airport runway protection zone are prime candidates for development of affordable and attainable housing, a high priority for Chatham's Select Board and citizens. Chatham's larger development priorities should not be compromised for the sake of accommodating Airport Commission and airport manager priorities. I encourage the Planning Board to avoid bureaucratic entanglements. My advice is stay focused on conforming Chatham zoning bylaws to Chatham's comprehensive development plan for West Chatham Village. It is the responsibility of Chatham's Select Board as chief policymakers under the town's Home Rule Charter to decide if expanded airport use is detrimental to Chatham residents and the town's comprehensive development plan. An overlay zone prohibiting development in or near the runway protection zone is unnecessary so long as airport use is limited to traditional uses. An overlay zone is inappropriate because it will deprive Chatham residents of much-needed affordable and attainable housing and limit mixed-use commercial development in West Chatham Village, a principal goal of Chatham's comprehensive plan. Another letter from Rick Levitt dated May 3rd. It is not without some irony that we find ourselves once again having to defend West Chatham Village from overdevelopment. Airports and highways impact a community more than any other type of development. Chatham's planning department and ordinary citizens labored for over a decade seeking Mass Department of Transportation cooperation to reverse highway encroachment. With their help and the help of Chatham elected officials, State Highway Route 28 was reinvented, becoming a traditional village center Main Street today. At a recent planning board meeting, you were advised by Chatham Airport commissioners to restrict any new building in the airport's runway protection zone that now extends into West Chatham Village and across the new village Main Street. It was also suggested that building in fringe areas outside the runway protection zone should be restricted. Calls by the Airport Commission to shift the burden, the responsibility for public safety from airport operations to the general public are inappropriate. Chatham Airport can function in its normal way without preventing the Planning Board from conforming zoning regulations to the town's comprehensive plan for revitalizing West Chatham Village. If runway protection zone boundaries remain unchanged, it will have the practical effect of stopping two planned Habitat for Humanity homes from being built on George Ryder Road South on town-owned land designated for that purpose. It will remove from consideration several other valuable properties suited for affordable and attainable housing. West Chatham Village is singled out in the town's comprehensive plan for mixed-income residential housing to address Chatham's critical housing shortage. Closing the housing gap is needed to restore Chatham's traditional diversity of working families who moved away over the past generation as housing prices escalated. A comprehensive alternative that allows continued revitalization of West Chatham Village has been put forward by concerned citizens. Chatham Airport runway was gradually lengthened over decades to 3,000 feet, pushing the runway protection zone into West Chatham Village. By pushing the threshold for takeoff and landing further back on the runway protection zone will be removed from village boundaries. Effectively shortening the runway this way will not prevent recreational pilots from safely flying small light planes traditionally served by Chatham Airport. It will substantially improve their safety with fewer obstacles in a relocated runway protection zone. Larger commercial passenger planes will be prevented from using the airport's shorter runway. Jet prop planes, only recently introduced to Chatham, can use the nearby 5,000-foot runway at Hyannis Regional Airport, specifically designed to safely handle commercial flights. I hope you will join me and others as we seek Chatham Airport Commission cooperation to reverse airport encroachment on West Chatham Village. And another memo and letter from Rick Levitt. As you know, I have been following the Planning Board's progress as you and your colleagues conform Chatham zoning to the comprehensive plan for West Chatham Village. I was surprised when looking at the board's packet for Monday's meeting tonight, to see a memo from staff suggesting that the board discuss and possibly vote on drafting, or have the Airport Commission draft, restrictive zoning limiting development in West Chatham Village. I cannot support any action that limits West Chatham Village development and full implementation of the comprehensive plan, particularly affordable housing. I plan on remotely joining the Planning Board meeting Monday, tonight, and make the attached comments. I hope you can support me. We have worked too hard and for too long to see Chatham's comprehensive plan for West Chatham Village become seriously compromised with restrictive zoning when there are reasonable alternatives. And continued comments. Restrictive zoning advocated by the Airport Commission limiting development in West Chatham Village is unfair and unnecessary. Before drafting restrictive land use bylaws, we need to consider the depth and breadth of community interests affected. The airport's RPZ and adjacent land in West Chatham Village will become a dead zone. Habitat for Humanity can't build 2 homes on George Ryder Road South. Shops with apartments above won't get built at the edges of Job Lot's parking lot. Development of properties adjacent to the RPZ will be frozen, property values wiped out, affordable housing opportunities lost. Chatham's comprehensive plan for mixed income, mixed-use development of West Chatham Village seriously compromised. A good faith effort by the Airport Commission is in order to avoid this outcome. West Chatham is in dynamic transition today, imposing land use restrictions favoring airport users over, say, working families hoping to find new affordable housing in West Chatham Village is unfair. Compromise is necessary for the common good. Airport users have no greater claim to their special interests than Chatham's working families in need of affordable housing. Mike Thompson has studied this more thoroughly than I or anyone else. He proposes an alternative that moves the existing RPZ out of West Chatham Village back onto empty airport property where it belongs, improving public safety and the safety of pilots and passengers. Thousands of vehicles pass every day in peak season through the RPZ in West Chatham Village. We can't move Main Street, but we can move the RPZ. This alternative to unfair West Chatham Village land use restrictions is a reasonable compromise. Mike told me it is a compromise strongly advocated by the FAA, who prefers empty RPZs wherever possible. I hope you will take the time to study Mike's proposal. Unfair land use restrictions for West Chatham Village are the last thing the Planning Board should be considering. I believe that your highest priority is continuing with your important work of zoning reform needed to implement Chatham's comprehensive plan for West Chatham Village. And that, again, is from Rick Levitt. So now it is past 5:30. We had hoped to end by 5:30, but we should take public comment. If any members of the public are connected by Teams or by phone, does anyone have their hand raised?
There are 2 hands that are
Madam
raised.
Chairman, this is Bob Worcester. I
Bob
have to
Wirtschafter,
sign
go
off at this
ahead.
point.
I'm sorry?
I have to sign off at this point.
All
I'm
right.
sorry. This is as long as I was able to be here.
Thank you, Bob.
Mhm.
So there are 2 hands raised, and before we go to that, I know that town council had to leave, and I know that maybe Matt had to leave, before they depart, if they're still connected, I would just ask if they have any further comments to make to the public and the board before we begin to take public comment. Maybe Matt, do you want to go ahead?
Madam Chairman, I don't have any other questions. I know it was my understanding, and I'd like the opportunity to do so, to work with the Airport Commission and come up with some language for this overlay district that the Airport Commission may present to the Planning Board, and perhaps, delve into some of these other questions that the Planning Board has at a future date.
Great.
But no further questions.
Thank you. And Pat?
I have no further comments right now, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can hang on the line for another 15 minutes or so if you'd like.
Thank you so much. That would be good. That'd be great. So let's open up to comments and questions from the public. And I see Steve Buckley, and who else has their hand raised? Steve Buckley?
There's the EBG who has their hand raised, Tom Wilson and Stephen Buckley.
So we have 3 people. So Steve Buckley, why don't you go ahead, and then we have EBG and Tom Wilson as well. Steve Buckley? You may be on mute. Then maybe, Steve Buckley, if we can't get you off mute, we'll go on to EBG. Who has?
Yes,
Thank you. Is this Elaine?
yes, it is. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to say that I think both you and Town Council eloquently stated the situation and the responsibility of the Planning Board in this. Unfortunately, the comprehensive plan never considered the airport. I don't believe that was ever part of the discussion in terms of what role they would play. And the reason there's so much contention today with the airport from residents in the neighborhood is that their homes were built within the RPZ. And some of them didn't realize it. I think it's only because of this most recent update to the master plan that people have become educated on what the RPZ is and what the concerns are surrounding it. And they are being impacted as the airport's gotten busier. I would also say, in defense of the airport, is that this isn't them saying this. They're simply the messengers. And the idea to displace the runway, that term is a little misleading. You're not displacing it, you're shrinking it, because you can't displace it north because that's where the other end of the runway is. So you're asking pilots to land on shorter runways, which in my view is inherently dangerous. And the FAA is not just another entity. Someone referred to it as just another entity telling you what to do. We do receive grant assurance money from them. And in exchange, we are supposed to follow their guidelines. And I think their guidelines are really clear. It said land use prohibited within the RPZ are residences and places of public assembly, churches, schools, hospitals, office buildings, shopping centers, and other uses with similar concentrations of people and places of assembly, public assembly. And that is, as Town Council and you both said, it's to protect the people on the ground. And that's because most accidents with planes occur on takeoff and landing. Rarely do they, occur midair. Now that the Planning Board is aware that it exists, I think that it is your responsibility to address it. I have a real concern that we would be willing to put in multifamily housing with families and children, fully knowing that the RPZ is not the place for those types of residences, in addition to adding office buildings and other places of assembly. Because I think you're opening yourselves up now that you're aware of it, or the town is, to liability. We didn't know it before, so we allowed development to take place there, but now we do know it. And I think that also the Planning Board is the place to draft the bylaw. You're the guys that are really good at that. And I think the overlay is the most efficient, the clearest, and so that as boards change over time, it's not lost. I think that was one of the problems, that because it was never codified anywhere, building was simply allowed without even considering the potential dangers. So I hope you move forward with it. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Elaine. And Let's see, we have Tom Wilson. Is his hand still raised?
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair, and can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. First, I want to start by saying thank you so much to the Planning Board for having this conversation tonight. It is long overdue, and it brings many, many issues and questions to the forefront. The letters from Mr. Levitt and the comments from Ms. Gibbs speak to many of the points that I was going to make, but what I would like to say is I'm a huge proponent of affordable and attainable housing, particularly in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. Our town is facing a crisis in this area. The strategic afford to live in town, and I am so appreciative of the efforts that the taking to address that. That being said, there are, I think, concessions and conversations that need to happen about the people who are already living in areas where, according to FAA guidelines, they shouldn't be living. And those kind of concessions need to come from the Airport Commission in terms of what their vision is for this airport. So specifically what I'd like to request for the next time they come before the Planning Board is specifics on grant assurance violation that Mr. Karen spoke to about displaced thresholds. I think that whole concept of displaced thresholds and making the airport so that it handles the air traffic that it was designed to handle, which is that of recreational pilots and not turboprops and small jets, is a wonderful compromise for the Planning Board, the Airport Commission, and the town to move forward to address housing in our town. So I think we need a much more detailed conversation rather than a vague statement that there are violations because some types of planes might not be able to land there now. Our airport wasn't designed for those types of planes. So those are my comments, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. And we in West Chatham continue to appreciate all your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And we still have, yes. Would you like, yes, please come to the mic and please state your name. And we'll make sure that those microphones are connected. Are those, I'm just checking with,
This?
oh, you have to press, yes, press the button
Are
at
we
the
on?
bottom of the mic. Yes,
Okay.
now you're on.
I wish we could comment throughout your meeting because I could have cleared up a lot
Could you kindly
I'm
identify,
sorry,
state your
David
name?
Bixby,
Yes,
West
thank
Chatham, Geranium Drive, just beyond the runway protection zone. I have a lot of points. I won't be able to make them all, so I'll try to go through fast. First of all, when you consider the expertise of the Airport Commission, keep in mind who's making money on these proposals. There are inherent conflicts of interest that drive a lot of the proposals. People are making money. It clouds their judgment or clouds what they recommend in the plan. There are options that are legitimate that are not seriously considered because it will cost people money at the airport. The airport master plan update has in the contract, the grant contract from the FAA, it required the Airport Commission to coordinate its master plan study with the local planning agency. They did nothing. They should have involved you guys beyond just a cursory letter early on in the process. They didn't do that.
Excuse me, could we have no conversations? Could we listen to Mr. Bixby? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. The town incurred obligations to limit incompatible uses in the runway protection zone and areas adjacent to the airport at least since 1964. So all these people that have come in and developed residential properties and businesses, it's not really fair. They came into these areas and developed permitted uses in zoning, which was allowed, to come in now and impose restrictions on them because the town or the airport commission ignored its responsibilities under the grant assurances is not really fair. Who's giving the consideration to those families and those businesses that we want to now impose restrictions on? Overlay district is a problem because the area is already developed. The area, there is no vacant land available, or very little. If you put an overlay district in, you effectively are going to have 90 to 100% non-conforming uses. I don't think that's an appropriate use of an overlay district where you have 100% non-conforming. Non-conforming should be uses should be isolated. It shouldn't be the whole district. And the runway protection zone is for the protection of the people and property on the ground. If it's already developed, the overlay district is going to do nothing to solve that problem. It's trying to provide a legal, technical solution to a problem without really addressing the root cause, is that the people are already there. The Airport Commission is basically, in proposing an overlay district, they're in denial. They have let a situation develop since 64, over 50, 60 years, and now they want to come in and solve the problem with a overlay district. Easements have nothing to do with what you're dealing with. Easements are for the protection of aircraft coming in with the slope. It has to do with the approach zone, what's happening in the air, and preventing intrusions into the airport protection slope. That has nothing to do with zoning protections in a runway protection zone and your overlay district, which are intended to protect people and property on the ground. The bylaw 100 addresses projections into the slope, into the airport approach. It does nothing to protect people and property on the ground who should not have been there but are today. I would suggest that this concept of a West Chatham neighborhood center and an airport runway protection zone are fundamentally incompatible. The town chose to ignore that. The airport commission deliberately so, maybe the selectmen through ignorance or disinterest. They've allowed a problem to develop here over the last 50 or 60 years. Overlay districts are not going to solve that problem. Something's got to give. Either people really shouldn't be there, which is going to be hard to do, or the airport commission needs to make concessions. They don't want to make concessions because, getting back to point one, who's making money, who's going to lose money if you change airport operations? The only real solution, given where we are today, is restrictions on airport activity and changing airport operations to shrink it back down to a smaller airport that's compatible with a West Chatham neighborhood association district. The airport is in denial on this. There are legitimate options. They're swept aside because the airport commission and associated people, they won't make money. So basically, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bixby. Any other members of the public who are connected with hands raised for comments? Seems like Steve Buckley still has hand raised.
I believe so.
Yes, I'm here. I figured out how to unmute
Yes.
myself.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Buckley.
Okay. For full disclosure, I should say that I'm in the process, my family is in the process of selling land in West Chatham for affordable housing. In 2003, I was living on that land, and I was also a member of the Long Range Planning Committee that drafted the current Long Range Plan, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Plan, that was adopted. And as a member at large, I did not I was not aware that there were long-term plans for the airport to expand and change the role of what it had traditionally been. So otherwise I would have brought that up to be for inclusion in there, but it was silent at the point. I do, so on that, from that perspective, I should also mention that I used to work in the environmental office at Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C. So I know about environmental assessments. And one of those things is that it's supposed to cover not just the physical environment of, in this case, planes coming and going and creating noise and so forth, but also its environment means human environment, and that means social and economic as well as physical environment. I have not read the environmental assessment, the final environmental assessment that was made available last week. I noticed on the town's website or the airport web pages, it's grown from the draft of 42 pages to 300 and something pages. So I have not had a chance to look at it yet, but it should be recognizing that it's more than just airport safety of, physical crashes or people not getting hurt from planes coming and going, but also how it affects the best interest, as Mr. Gagan pointed out earlier, the best interests overall of the town of Chatham. So it should be saying that. If it doesn't, it's deficient. The other part I would try to make sure is that it would be nice to be able to see whether guidelines and directives and regulations, there's a difference between should and shall. And that needs to be cleared up because sometimes people use the word guidelines when they really mean requirements. And if we can clear up that one thing, I think that would be the best things going forward in any conversations. What's going to be required if the town of Chatham takes money, or rather the airport commission takes money? How is that going to obligate the town of Chatham, if at all? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Do we have anyone else from the public who'd like to make comments? I do see an airport commission hand raised. Is that correct? Are there?
That was me, and it was from earlier in the evening.
All right, great.
I frankly don't have anything to say. We will take care of things as time goes on, and we will do the best we can to help the planning board with their zoning issues.
This is Huntley Harrison speaking.
Yeah.
All right. Are there other hands raised? It's hard for me to see, so no other hand. Great. So we have no other public comments. So Bob Wirtschafter has had to leave. Warren Chain has had to leave. We do have remaining board members. There was a motion presented. Clarification. Yes, Mr. Gagan, please. Please go ahead.
I have in my possession a vote from Warren Chain. I have his proxy. So if we do and when we do have a vote, I'll read his.
I don't know that we have a procedure where we vote by proxy. Ally, could you comment?
I don't believe that we do, but it's very helpful that town council is on the call, so I'd like him to just weigh in on it. If the board feels that because 2 board members have left the meeting because of time considerations, you could also continue your discussion on this to another meeting when the full board is here to make the determination. So that is also another option.
Yes. Yes. So let's hear a comment from town council about proxy votes.
Madam Chair, I think it's highly unusual to have a proxy vote where there's no specific policy or procedure adopted by the board, if that is in fact the case. I would discourage it just for purposes of open meeting law compliance more than anything else.
Thank you. And also, I think we're still in the middle of things. So thank you, Pat. So we did have a motion before the floor, and we could reiterate that motion. I would also like to propose a reevaluation, but did you want to go ahead, Mr.?
Yes, I'd like to read the motion, please.
Please go ahead.
The motion I read earlier is that the planning board not entertain any overlay district to be supported by the planning board at this time and to continue our zoning work for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center.
I'll second that motion.
All right. I'm going to suggest rephrasing slightly, that we just say that we, as Ally suggested also, that we continue, which means we postpone our discussion of the RPZ issues to a later date. I think there's been a request from an...
That's not the motion, Madam Chair.
I know, I'm proposing an amendment to the motion and a rephrasing of the motion, that we continue the discussion at a later date, gather more information, and so on. I think the motion as stated would mean that we're voting to never, ever, ever consider an RPZ zoning.
It doesn't say that.
Is that what you're suggesting?
No, let me read it for a third time,
Okay.
please. That the planning board not entertain any overlay district to be supported by the planning board at this time, and continue with our zoning work for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center.
All right. I still would like to propose that we add the phrase that we continue this discussion specifically regarding the RPZ at a later date when more information can be gathered, which was consistent with the request of certain planning board members.
It was consistent with whom?
With the request of planning board members for more information.
I can't believe the position you're taking as the chair. You have avoided 6 members of this planning board and what they've stated tonight, and you're advancing your statement and your political views on this.
They're
Let's
not
talk
they're
about
actually
the
not
motion that's
political.
on the board.
All right.
And if you want to add an amendment, we certainly can vote the amendment.
Yeah, all right. I'm sorry, we can't have public participation when we're in the middle of a board vote. Thank you very much, Mr. Bixby. All right, so let's take the motion on the floor. I understood that there have been requests from a number of board members for additional information, and with additional information, the consideration of what is necessary or not necessary for the RPZ can continue. So that's the nature of the amendment that I wish to make. It's not a political statement, it's a procedural statement. But let's put forth, Arthur, did you have a comment?
I just want to know, we have a discussion on the motion?
That's exactly what we're doing. We're discussing the motion, which is proper procedure, and Arthur has some comments.
Yeah. I think it's too early to make any kind of motion on anything, quite frankly. There's a lot of information that is lacking here. We've stated that. The applicant has even said that they need to provide more. I mean, the Airport Commission has said they need to provide more. There's no reason that we need to take any action here at this point. If we don't take any action, it would be the same thing as what the motion says right now. There are other alternatives. They should be brought forward so that we can do an evaluation on it before we actually make a decision one direction or another. I think it's just premature to make any kind of action at this point. It's not to say that this wouldn't be appropriate at some other time. But we've had a first major discussion on this since the April, which April wasn't really a discussion of anything. This was the first one that we had. We got some backbone into it. And I'm understanding it a little bit better. I would like to continue getting information so we can make a better informed decision before we take any action at this point.
Thank you, Arthur. I would agree with that. It's just, in a sense, continuing this discussion, which means we postpone it and continue it at a later date when more information can be provided, and that we not take any specific action at this time.
Are you making a motion?
Well, we can't make a motion if we're not taking any specific action. I'm agreeing with Arthur and suggesting that we postpone any action.
So you're negating my motion.
Yes,
I don't think you have the power to do that, Madam Chair.
All right,
I
then
think
let's,
we need to make a motion. The motion's been seconded, and we
All
need
right.
to vote.
all right. And do we have we had a second to the motion?
We have a second already,
All
Madam
right.
Chair.
Then let's do a vote. Bob Dubus?
I'm going to abstain.
All right. Roger Griffin?
Oh, yes, sorry. I'm going to abstain. Bob Dubus.
I second Tom's motion.
Yes, and so you also need to vote. How do you vote? Do you vote yes or no?
I vote no.
You vote no against the
Oh,
motion
so
that you
I
seconded?
vote yes, right.
Yes, you would vote yes. All right.
Exactly, right.
Thank you. And Tom Gagan?
I vote yes, and I have a proxy signed by George W.
But we've already discussed that we can't
Yeah, I know,
accept
but
proxy votes.
this is part of the game we're playing, and he's voted yes for this motion.
All right. So and Arthur Sprue?
Arthur Spur, I vote no.
And this is Catherine Halpern, I vote no. So we have one abstention, 2 noes, 1 proxy. We've discussed, we can't really accept. And we have 2 yeses. Is that a correct summary?
Madam Chairman, I would like to just give a reason why I voted to
Right.
abstain. It's
Yes,
because
please go ahead.
I don't believe there's enough members here to fully
That's also true.
get the gist of it, and I knew it was going to be a dead heat. So I'd rather see the dead heat so we can continue this at a later date when there's enough members here to make a decision, so we're not walking on each other.
All right. And that was also a suggestion that we continue this discussion to a later date. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I'd like to reserve the right to bring this motion after we have continued discussion.
To be honest, I've never heard of making a motion at one meeting and then reserving the right to make it at some future meeting at an undisclosed date. I would suggest that when we have that meeting, we don't know when that date would be, that you would just make your motion again. I think that might be a better course of action. And you may, by that time, you may rephrase it, or you may add to it or change it based on any new information. Did you have any comments? Yeah. All right, so I think, yeah, I think we need to close this matter. I think we will continue the discussion to a later meeting. We had not enough members available to make a valid vote. That's what I'm hearing people say. We did take a vote, and I just want to summarize. There was 1 abstention, 2 votes yes, and 2 votes no.
Madam Chair, that's 5 members of the board. We only need 4 votes.
That's correct, but it's it's an inconclusive vote nevertheless.
And what is the position of that type of vote?
For a split vote,
If we had 3-3, what would be the decision on a motion with
it would be a tie. It would be a tie vote. There's no
No,
decision.
it wouldn't, madam. It wouldn't take place, the motion.
Right. Right. So I think we can, yeah, let's just close this. All
I'll
right.
second that motion.
All right. So let's do a roll call vote. But we're not we can't close the meeting. We still have other matters on the agenda. We're just closing the discussion on the airport to continue it to a later date. Is that correct? All right, and we have a
Yes.
second to that motion. So Bob Dubus,
I vote yes to
Roger
continue.
Griffin.
I'll second that motion.
All right. And you need to
Oh,
also.
vote, yeah, I vote yes.
And Tom Gagan,
Tom Gagan votes yes.
Arthur Sprue,
Art Spru, yes.
and this is Catherine Halpern. I vote yes. All right. So the next item on our agenda is actually the minutes for the July 26, 2021 meeting. Does anyone have any corrections or amendments to the minutes? There being none, could I have a vote to approve the minutes for July 26th?
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes from July 26th.
Thank you. And could I have a second to that motion?
Roger Griffin, I'll second that.
All right, so let's do a roll call vote. Bob Dubus?
Bob Dubus abstains, he wasn't here.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Roger Griffin?
Approve?
Tom Gagan?
I approve, but there is a clerical error.
All right.
Under present, if we could change Roger's name to the correct spelling, please.
All right, and where, can you note the,
Well, there's a D left out,
there's a D, oh, yes.
and he's
Great.
so modest he wouldn't point it out.
Roger. So in the beginning, change it to Rodger. So noted. So let's go ahead. Do you vote to approve with amendment as stated? Tom Gagan,
Yes.
Arthur Spru,
Arthur Spru, yes.
and Catherine Halpern. I vote to approve. Excuse me. Next item on the agenda is the formal site plan review for 1200 Main Street. And we do have a note from the applicant who wishes to withdraw this matter. And he says, sorry for the last-minute notice, but per my voicemail, we will be withdrawing our application for 1200 Main Street and Honeydew Donuts. Due to some business concerns, we cannot feasibly move forward. We also need to focus on our other potential location in West Yarmouth. I wanted to thank everyone for your assistance during this entire process. So for the record, at the planning board hearing tonight and for the ZBA hearing, I, Tony Gianfrido, representing Honeydew Donuts, would like to formally request to withdraw our application for 1200 Main Street without prejudice. So this motion is withdrawn. I don't think we need to vote. We do a vote. All right, so we do need to vote to confirm the withdrawal of this matter from our agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion that we approve the withdrawal of 1200 Main Street application.
Donuts,
Honeydew
yeah.
Donuts.
Formal site plan.
I'll second that. Bob
Thank you.
Dubus.
So Bob Dubus, how do you vote?
Approve.
Roger Griffin,
Roger Griffin, approve?
Tom Gagan,
Approve.
and Art Spru,
Art Spru, approve.
and Catherine Halper, and I approve. So the last item on our agenda is a request for comment from the Zoning Board of Appeals regarding 68 Shell Drive. And this is with regards to the construction of a driveway in a conservancy district. Do we have anyone who's presenting for this matter, Ally? Yeah. Thank you.
I do believe Bill Riley is just presenting, and I had to mute him just because there was feedback, so
All
if he
right.
wants to unmute
Thank you.
himself.
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Chair. Bill Riley on behalf of Containment Point LLC. The plan before you today is a much revised plan from the previous plan that was submitted. The amount of fill proposed has been greatly reduced. Dave Clark, our engineer, is on the line. And if you have questions regarding volume of fill, he can provide it. But initially, we proposed a driveway that would be above the flood elevation for its entire length. And we requested a great deal of fill around the front of the building and the garage. The size of the building's been substantially reduced. The driveway no longer reaches the flood elevation, and I know one of the concerns you have has to do with interfering with the flow of flood waters. And we wanted to point out, if we didn't do it in our first hearing, that this property is a low point in the neighborhood. And we provided a report from Woods Hole Group that emphasizes that. And so the flood water that does enter the property, it doesn't flow anywhere. It just sits there. which is one reason why we wanted the driveway to be above the flood elevation, so that the property owner would have access to his property and emergency vehicles would have access to his property, even if there was a flood. We have reduced the height of the driveway, but it should be passable in most instances. So I'd like to ask Dave Clark to review the changes in the plan for you. Dave, you there?
Yep.
Okay.
David Clark here, if you can hear me.
Yeah, speak up, Dave.
Go ahead,
David
Mr. Clark.
Clark Engineering. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As Bill stated, we've reduced the amount of fill, so to speak, on this property. It was set at, the driveway was set above elevation 11, which is the 100-year flood for this zone. And we've reduced it down considerably. So what you really see here is regrading. We're creating two low spots to the left and right of the driveway. That will be basically borrow areas to construct the driveway. And I don't know if it was mentioned at the first meeting, but one of the reasons for this driveway in this configuration and elevation was try to meet the fire code for access for safety vehicles. It's not always applied in this town, but certainly in other towns in the Cape. The fire department is always interested in development and actually providing for safe access for vehicles. So in this particular case, this is a dead-end road, and the fire code requires that if the dead-end roads is more than 150 feet, this is 650 feet, that a adequate turning area be provided at the end of the road. Currently, there is no turning area, and any fire apparatus would have to go off the driveway into the lawn area, which is very close to groundwater, and would have a chance of getting stuck down there. And that's, again, that's part of the fire code. And so Bill had mentioned the report by the Woods Hole Group. The previous application showed several thousand yards of fill being brought into the site, and basically removing the property from the floodplain. And the results of that report showed that filling in the floodplain actually reduced flooding on neighboring properties and obviously on this property. So contrary to what the bylaw says, filling was actually a benefit in this instance. But we had issues with the amount of fill with the zoning board, and we went back to the drawing board and greatly reduced it. And I believe right now there really isn't any filling. Because we are borrowing material from portions of the site to construct the driveway. The driveway will be of a pervious material. Again, there's language in the bylaw about reducing the ability of the land to absorb flood waters. This is a coastal flood zone, so the land really does not absorb flood waters, and I think that was pointed out in the Woods Hole report. Typically, flooding that occurs from inland sources, like a rain event, is where you would be concerned about filling areas that absorb flood waters, or paving areas that absorb flood waters. In this particular instance, that doesn't apply. So I think at this point, we've redesigned the project so it meets the intent of the bylaw. And as Bill said, I think we're going to the zoning board this Thursday, and they'll be looking for your comment. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, Bob Dubus, please go ahead.
Hey, Dave, you said you're not going to bring in that much fill, but how much fill are you going to borrow out of the bankings for the driveway?
I hadn't done that calculation. but it's basically a wash at this point.
What do you mean it's a wash? How high are you gonna raise the driveway?
About 3 feet at the house. That would be, so basically we're gonna come down the hill to a low point just before the cul-de-sac and then come back up to the house.
Right, so to make this driveway, you are gonna fill. You're just not gonna drag the fill in by truck. You're just gonna dig it out of the bank and put it in there.
Yeah, so it's not fill, it's
What do you mean it's
regrading.
not fill?
It's regrading,
It's regrading?
yes.
That's a legal term.
If it's
That's
not in
another
the
word
place
for
where it
fill.
is now, it's called fill. No matter where you get it from.
Regrading.
Which is still against the bylaw. So, you know,
Well, there are numerous instances where activities that are allowed by special permit or by right in the floodplain, where fill occurs and no mention's ever made of it. For one, there are 50 septic systems down the Little Beach area that are fill in the floodplain. Every time a revetment gets built in this town is filling in the floodplain. When the town rebuilt the Eldridge Trap Dock, they set the bulkhead further out on the water, they filled. They raised the level of the driveway there a foot. So we're not asking for anything that's unusual or in the past has been prohibited.
except that it's prohibited by the bylaw. Bob Dubus,
So-
did you
so
have
all
some
the other
other
activities I
questions
just
or
mentioned?
comments?
Madam
Yeah.
Chair, yeah, this is Bill Riley.
Actually, Mr. Riley, I'd like to go on and go through the board
I know,
members
but, you
and
know,
see
you-
if other
but
members have
I
questions.
object, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
I object.
Thank you.
You're saying it's prohibited by the bylaw.
It is prohibited by the bylaw, Mr. Riley.
Not prohibited by the bylaw, because we go before the zoning board many times on the issue of regrading versus filling. And the zoning board of appeals accepts this type of proposal, and it has many times in the past.
So let's go through. Bob Dubus, did you have more questions or
Yeah,
comments? or-
all we have is a discussion and a vote and
Yeah.
give our opinion.
Yes, we have either negative or positive
What we come out and
recommendations.
say is basically a non-binding
Exactly.
note to the Board of Appeals to take what we say and do with it what they want. So we're not arguing with you about it. We're just bringing our opinions out, and then we're going to vote on it, and then we're not going to make the ultimate decision.
Yes, that's correct. It's just a request for comment. And again, specifically about the driveway in the Conservancy District, not about other matters regarding this project. And it's a request for our comment and recommendation. So, but you're absolutely right, it's non-binding. So, Roger Griffin, do you have more questions
No,
or
I don't have any
comments?
questions.
Tom Gaken.
Thank you, Madam Chair. David, I've looked, I mean, this plan is very busy, and I've looked multiple times to find the cross-section in section BB. I'm sure it's C, C minus, C prime, and DD. Can you tell me where the heck they are?
BB? They're on the second sheet.
Okay. No, it's on the sheet. Okay.
There's AA there.
Okay, yeah, there's no AA.
CC is here, and
The engineer has pointed them out, thank you.
is here. It only took me an hour to figure that out.
Did you have other questions?
I do
Tom?
have one other question, please, if I may. Part of my confusion in being there Friday, there's a lot of work going on. I guess that's not my business decision to make. But is the new structure, the new house, is the elevation of that house being raised? And what is the current height of that house from the old grade? How much of this house is being elevated? By what level in feet is this house being elevated from the old house position, or the old house which is being moved, or something's being done with it, to the new home? I believe it's going to be at a higher elevation. Is that correct?
Yes, it's required to by both the building code and our local bylaw. So it's coming up basically from the existing grade, it's coming up about 7 feet.
7 feet, yes, I saw that on the plan. So when we measure the height of this building, the structure, where is the baseline from which we start that elevation?
The lowest adjacent grade, which will be elevation 7.7.
And the ridge elevation is going to be 37.7 feet?
Yes.
Is that any issue for the board?
It's not an issue for our discussion specifically. Ally, did you want to comment?
Sure, yeah. We, as the board knows, we do look specifically at the driveway, but just to answer that question, based upon the lowest adjacent grade and the ridge height, the structure would only be 30 feet, which is the max that our bylaw allows, if that was the question that you were.
Yes, and I think I saw on a website that there was another structure which above that, but that may be decorative in nature. But that was my question, is what is the ultimate height of this new building?
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there more information on that, Ally? Are you looking it up, or no?
If the applicants want to discuss it, they can. I do have the actual elevations here as well, but again,
if I could suggest, these issues are not specifically, these issues are not specifically the purview of the planning board for our recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals as per their request. It has come up that some planning board members have some concerns about this project regarding these other issues. I would just like to clarify that the proper arena to vet those issues and to discuss those issues would be when this project goes before the Zoning Board of Appeals. But then in that capacity, if you wish to address the Zoning Board of Appeals about these other issues, not the driveway, you would do so as a private citizen rather than as a planning board member. That would be the procedure. Is that okay? Is that all right? All right. Arthur, other issues regarding this?
Yes, Art Sprue. So I want to start with the driveway and its coverage. It's increased 50%, 1,685 square feet over the existing driveway. You've added what you referred to as a turnaround. Well, usually when we have turnarounds for something like this with a single property, it's a T, which what was on the existing property. Putting a circular driveway or a roundabout, you want to call it, raising it by 3 feet and trying to push it off as emergency vehicles is to me not really relevant. The turnaround for any emergency vehicle could be as where the first turnaround is, which was high ground there at elevation 10 and 11. It's right near where the proposed relocation of the existing house to be located. That would be an appropriate turnaround, high dry land. Reducing the driveway to what it is right now in size, approximate size, to about 3,500 square feet makes more appropriate sense to do that so that you wouldn't have to fill 3 feet of grade in there. So that's my major concern when you're talking about that. And when you think about the other things that were increased on here, the building increased, square footage increased by 75%, and the conservancy coverage increased by 67%. So there has been significant increases on all aspects of what is being proposed in here. And I think that's inconsistent to what our bylaws are attempting to do. Much less impact could be done and still get what you're looking for. This plan still needs to go back for another round of revisions, in my opinion.
Thank you, Arthur. So I'll just comment on the driveway itself, which is under our purview. I agree with others that there are many issues on this project which are of concern. The driveway itself, it is still a significant expansion of driveway by 50%, although it's less of an expansion than the plan that was brought before us in December. It's still a very significant expansion. And also, there is still the use of fill with regards to the driveway. So on those two matters alone, I would suggest that we send a negative recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals regarding the construction of a driveway in the Conservancy District. Any comments from the board, or do I even have a motion to that effect?
David Clark here. Could I respond to some of those comments?
You may.
Yeah, I just feel that it's disappointing that the planning board would choose to ignore the fire code for purposes of what they imagine that they're trying to protect. You have a document from the Woods Hole Group who are experts in the field of floodplain management. In fact, the Woods Hole Group is working with Massachusetts DOT on a flood preparedness plan. And part of what the DOT is considering is raising road levels to combat climate change. And so the Woods Hole Group is a leading authority. Their reports say that the previous project, which had a much larger house and much more fill, had no impacts on flood characteristics in this area. So to say that the driveway is too big and ignore all the facts that have been presented is basically you're making a decision on emotional issues and not the facts that are presented to you. I can certainly provide the board with the fire code that talks about an emergency route. This home and all the houses on this road do not have an emergency route at this point. And one of the reasons for the circular driveway is to allow emergency vehicles to turn around and get back out this road. The turning parking area that's in front of the historic house or next to the historic house is not sufficient enough to get a vehicle in, emergency vehicle in. We would have to probably extend it another 30 feet towards the septic system in order to make that work. And that would be the end of my comments.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Clark. Go ahead, Mr. Roddy.
Very briefly, I think it's unfortunate that a waterfront community currently confronting sea level rise in several areas, this being one of them, Horn Cottages being another, is ignoring that reality. And we're trying to build resilience here so that this property won't be lost to productive use. And we're doing that with what we consider to be a very minimal amount of fill that will, under most circumstances, remain above the floodplain or above the flood elevation in a flooding situation. So we're falling on the sword of, gee whiz, we shouldn't allow any fill here. Well, the bylaw allows for the construction of driveways, and I don't care what you call it. You have to use appropriate material to construct a driveway, as Bobby Dubus would know. And so some material will undoubtedly have to be brought in so that it's be an all-weather driveway. And so, if this were something where you could point to an environmental harm because of the material being brought in, I could understand the concerns. But I would point out that the Conservation Commission, whose job it is to protect, the environment against inappropriate uses, has fully approved the previous plan. And and we've had discussions with them about the revised plan. And because they've already approved the previous plan, they don't even want to deal with this plan because they're just going to write an order of conditions that allows it to go ahead. Because, in their opinion, it's a reasonable use of the property. And there is no environmental harm to it. So honoring, your vision of no fill, all fill is illegal, in the face of their very considered recommendation. We had three or four meetings with them. It seems to me to be, sort of honoring, form above substance. I mean, really, this is a situation where the property's in a hole. The water's not going to go anywhere else. It's just going to come into this hole. We're not preventing stormwater from moving anywhere. And that's what theoretically you're protecting. The movement of stormwater or floodwaters. And if you just read the report, although it's a long report, you would know that these floodwaters aren't going anywhere. They're just going to come in and fill this hole. And so the idea that just because we're raising the elevation of the driveway, we are not preventing the movement of floodwaters, which is what your responsibility is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. It is our responsibility to implement the protective bylaws of the town of Chatham. Possibly, once that report is thoroughly reviewed, possibly the bylaws of the town of Chatham would be revised to implement some of the recommendations of this report that you referenced that, quite frankly, I don't have a copy of. But that is something, that there's a process involved with that. We would have to review the report. It would have to be, recommended that it's implemented in the town of Chatham. The bylaws would need to change. That may be many years, some years in the future. We have to deal with this situation as it is now. Our responsibility is to review the construction of a proposed driveway in a conservancy district based on the bylaws that we have right now, and make a recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The way I see it right now, this does not conform to our bylaws, and I would suggest a negative recommendation. If other board members would like to discuss, please feel free to respond or discuss. Otherwise, I would ask for a motion.
Art Sprue, I'll make a motion to send a negative recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals with this similar statement of what we had in our letter from December 15, 2020.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Roger Griffin, I'll second that.
So let's do a roll call vote. Bob Dubus?
I'm for the recommendation.
Thank you. And Roger Griffin?
Roger Griffin, approve.
Tom Gagan?
Approve.
Art Sprue?
Art Sprue, approve.
Catherine Halpern, I approve the motion as presented, that we send a negative recommendation regarding this project, the construction of a driveway in the Conservancy District, to the Zoning Board of Appeals with similar wording as we used in our December negative recommendation. Thank you. All right. I think that is the last item on our agenda for tonight. So if there's no other discussion by board members or by any members of the public, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So ordered.
Thank you. Could I have a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you. So let's do a roll call vote. Bob Dubus,
Approve.
Roger Griffin,
Roger Griffin, approve.
Tom Gagan,
Approve.
Art Spru.
Art Spru, approve.
This is Catherine Halpern. I approve. Let's note the time as 6:36 in the evening. We've adjourned this meeting. Thank you, everyone, for participating.